I would like to think that we probably had the worst of the kind of fintech bubble burst.
In this episode of In Check with Fintech, we're taking a deep dive into the trends, challenges, and lessons that shaped Fintech in 2024 with a special in-house panel featuring two of PCN's recruitment experts, Nathan Southerton and Kevin Daul. Nathan, PCN's Director of Permanent Placement, specializes in fraud, risk, and compliance recruitment, helping fintech companies build trusted teams in one of the most critical areas of the industry. Kevin, on the other hand, brings a global perspective to product and solutions recruitment with a deep understanding of what it takes to connect exceptional talent with fintech innovators. So, whether you're a founder, recruiter, or job seeker, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss.
Review of 2024 fintech with Kevin and Nathan and myself, obviously, yours truly. So what happened in 2024? I think it's been an interesting year altogether, right? We're coming out of, I feel, a lot of macroeconomic things that happened this year before. I would like to think that we probably had the worst of the kind of fintech bubble burst. However, if you look at funding, then I think funding is halved in 2024 compared to 2023. Number of deal sizes halved as well. So we're clearly not out of it. I think we had still several large reorgs. One that springs to mind for me, PayPal,
Worldline,
Nexi, Solaris. I think there were smaller ones as well, right? That were like, okay, we're going to let go of 70 people with, TrueLayer, for example. And I think many of the open banking companies have let go of a few people. So I think everyone was trimming somewhat here and there. Although I do feel now, reflecting back on 2024 from a hiring point of view, I think it was definitely better than last year. Do you feel the same, Kev? What do you think?
Yeah, I do think there has been an improvement. I don't know, we're quite, back to the good old days.
No.
But yeah, I feel like companies are just being a bit more conservative. I think they are hiring the people they need for the roles rather than, just bloated sales teams. So yeah, I think it's gotten better. I still think there's a lot of room for an improvement.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think from a hiring point of view, probably most hiring activity we saw was more in the individual contributor level, right? A lot on compliance and risk and fraud, AML, KYC, sales quite a bit. And then executive level or even management level roles was pretty slow moving, I would say. If there were, then it was a backfill more so than anything, not really newer roles created.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, compliance, risk, fraud, these are areas that are never going to go away. It's a regulatory requirement, and you've seen regulators like the FCA kind of stamping down a little bit on payments companies. But no, hiring has definitely still been slow. I think if you compare it to 2023, there was a massive slowdown. There was not an awful lot of funding, and businesses had to figure out how they were going to manage that process. And coming into 2024, I mean, they still need to hire people. It's just been at far lower levels than we've seen in previous years.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, for me as well, I think probably 75% of my roles have been ICs. I don't know exactly why that is. But yeah, I think in terms of the vacancies I have right now, primarily ICs, kind of those mid-level individuals rather than a head of, a director of, etc.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Some other things I wrote down that happened this year, and not necessarily purely from a hiring point of view, but kind of notable events that happened. There was a launch, of course, of Wero by the EPI that went live at the end of this year. We had Advent acquire Nuve, take it private. Ryan Reynolds probably becoming a very rich man on the back of that. Smart investor for sure. I think a lot happened in the crypto space as well. I think it became more mainstream. We had increased regulation, of course, introduction of Mika, and the fact that Stripe acquired Bridge, I think goes to show that there's a keen interest on kind of crypto and type of blockchain technology, which has been around for a few years, but it seems to, just every year seems to grow. And also if you look at the market cap for kind of crypto in general, it doubled this year from 1.7 trillion to 3.6 trillion. This is no investment advice, I have to say. And N26 was no longer under BaFin supervision, right? That got lifted. I think it was a big milestone for them. Other neobanks, however, Revolut, Bank, were under, I think, extra scrutiny, I would say, of the regulators, which is interesting. And then Klarna, I mean, they fought for an IPO, of course, in the US. And for me, probably the biggest company who's really doubled down on AI, impressively so. Most recently, I think they published this year or quarterly results that was presented by Sebastian, but then his AI, which I think is super interesting how they're experimenting with it. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, I've also seen a lot of the marketing stuff that they did through AI. So creating campaigns strictly from an LLM or an AI platform.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was up to date on the marketing side of things, and it's just interesting to see how these companies try to incorporate it anyway, not just trying to eliminate kind of the low-hanging fruit or the more entry-level jobs.
So true, yeah. How do you look back? Any other events, Nathan, that are worth mentioning, 2024?
In terms of AI adoption?
And not just in general, no. Fintech as a whole. Anything that stood out?
Revolut finally got its UK banking license.
True.
It's good to see.
It's a big one, yeah.
As you said, there's been increased scrutiny on these companies, but I think that's been sort of that way for years. It's good to see them kind of coming out the other side. As you said, N26 lifting its restrictions and Revolut finally getting that banking license. I think with Bunk, they had a lot of scrutiny in terms of the fraud that was going on. I mean, I think they needed to put some slightly stricter controls in place, but I don't necessarily know if it was their fault exactly or if it's something that the regulators kind of breathe down on them too heavily on.
No, exactly. Yeah. I think with these kind of neobanks are obviously trying to change things. There will always be, I think, them kind of acting on the edge of within and outside of regulation. I would say that's the only way that they're going to change a system or have an impact, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them operate with a much higher risk appetite than your traditional banks. But I mean, they are disruptors by nature. But the growth that they're seeing and the way that they're doing things clearly shows that it's working. I think Revolut and Bunk have seen phenomenal growth over the last sort of 12 to 24 months. If you look at South America, Nubank as well is rapidly expanding and is already a huge player. So no, it's a really exciting time for neobanking in general, I think.
I think that's a very interesting region as well, LATAM. I think that's where a lot is happening right now within fintech. I think in Brazil specifically, they opened up and there's a big push for more open banking regulation. And there's Nubank, who are obviously massively growing. It's just a market that is ready to digitize.
Yeah, but it's one I have to say I don't hear that much about, and yet it's such a vast market, which seems a little bit untapped even now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, maybe so local.
Yeah, could be.
I don't know. What do you think is the biggest fintech trend of 2024? What have you seen this year really being on the rise or continuing to grow?
I mean, personally, I'd say the adoption of AI seems to be sometimes a little bit of a buzzword in the industry, I have to say. Across fintech, I mean, my specialism in financial crime, compliance, and so on, it seems to be the solution to everything. I think it's augmenting the way in which a lot of businesses are doing things, but I still think there's a way to go before it's the solution that everybody's talking about.
What do you think about the hype in AI?
I think it's valid for sure. I don't necessarily think it's going to take over everything in terms of coming into these businesses and really revolutionizing it itself. I think it's more of kind of an add-on tool for the individuals in that company.
Yeah, I really feel it has really gained traction this year, but it's been used for much longer, of course. I mean, data science, large language models have been around for way longer. And also in fintech, fraud prevention has been working with AI for much more. But I think now that it's gone out into the kind of general application of AI broader than something that we are not seeing, which is fraud prevention, I think it's now really starting to pick up, and the applicability is just massive. Do you hear clients speaking about it a lot? Do you hear clients asking about it a lot?
To be honest, not as much as I should, given all the hype that I hear about it in other places. I mean, from a recruitment standpoint, there's definitely more adoption and more tools coming out. But as Kevin was saying, it more just kind of adds to the job as opposed to replacing it. I mean, things like ChatGPT and so on have streamlined a lot of these things, but they haven't revolutionized the industry by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. I mean, again, similar story as to what Nathan mentioned, right? In terms of hiring managers asking if we use AI, I don't really get that question a lot in a briefing call or a new client call. I think it's more of a tool for me to use to streamline candidate management, to look at my internal processes, and then have something kind of critique those internal processes. So yeah, I think it's, again, more of a tool that I use quite often rather than something that my clients are coming to me asking if we use it, how we've implemented it, et cetera.
Yeah, I also think it definitely has a place, I think, in our job, but more as a companion rather than a replacement, more so. I think it creates a lot of noise as well. It's crazy what you see on the internet of people cloning themselves and them having them take interviews and stuff like that, or using ChatGPT whilst they get asked questions. So they're answering from ChatGPT. I think, yeah, they're really hiring kind of the best candidate. I think that's it. And also now with LinkedIn coming in with an AI agent, I think the way that they're portraying it, this is going to help you save so much time, and you just put in a question and it will spit out the ideal candidate. Yeah, I don't think it will work that way for the main reason that LinkedIn is making money off us putting attention into their platform. So if we find a candidate by just filling in a simple search word, we're off the platform in a heartbeat, and that's obviously not what they want, right? They want your eyeballs. So that's not the way they operate. And I think towards candidates, it can create, if you just use it for automation and you have it replace our work, I think it can create a really bad candidate experience of not having personalized messages or just sounding very robotic. Or, I mean, it will only get better from here, of course, but I think before it starts to sound really authentic, I feel there's still, I hope at least, a couple more years to go within that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a couple more years. And I think with AI and LinkedIn's kind of push to implement that onto its platform, I still think there's a lot of ambiguity on LinkedIn. I think it's kind of up to the specific candidate or individual to update their profile fully. And yeah, I'm just trying to think of if that certain candidate doesn't necessarily have all that information posted on LinkedIn, will then an AI model or platform be able to pick up on that?
Yeah.
So I do still think there is a bit of a human touch that's required, especially on the candidate side of things. Yeah, and I think that's why, companies are still using us and not completely switching to these type of solutions.
Exactly, yeah. Putting AI to one side, then what else do you think is a big fintech trend? 2024, I wrote down embedded finance.
Maybe 2023 we're here. Yeah, I think embedded finance always a big one. We've seen a lot about like interoperability as well. Yeah, I think just as long as we can find a way for the different players in payments to kind of communicate better among themselves, I think will be maybe a wave going forward. So I know we've seen a lot of talk about interoperability. To be honest, I feel like it's still a vague kind of term for us to kind of understand. But I do see that one tossed around a lot as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm going to go back on embedded finance though, because I do think indeed 2023 was a big trend.
Yeah. But
I see it in 2024 also more so, right? I mean, companies like Molly, for example, spending more resources on it. As well as just in general, not just large enterprises, but it makes it accessible as well for smaller companies, right? To implement certain embedded finance products through their provider, like Molly or Adyen, and therefore streamline a lot of their business. I think there's probably still a lot to be done in that space. I'm curious to see what's going to happen next year as well, because it will be continuing to be a trend. And I think if you look at our biggest client base as well for this year, probably a lot came from embedded banking, BaaS, banking as a service, or whatever. For me, it's more the same, but or at least in a similar area. I don't want to now insult anyone, but I do feel that there a lot happened in 2024. If you look at Numeral, for example, Solaris, Clearbank, Any other ones we can think of? Swan, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these businesses are really on the rise.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've managed to see some pretty phenomenal growth over the last 12 months says that they're kind of bucking the trend that a lot of the rest of fintech and payments in general is seeing.
Yeah.
I think looking forward, I think the bigger players are going to start to get more involved in the embedded finance space. So the likes of Adyen and Stripe are going to pour a lot of money into these areas, or just acquire some of these businesses alongside them.
I think it's diversify, right? So they create different revenue streams. I think if you only focus on payments, then that tends to be a race to the bottom, especially if you have talk about more of the local payment options, such in the Netherlands, for example, ideal. But then if you're able to offer embedded finance product or even embedded lending, then you can actually, just open up a whole new revenue generator.
Yeah, I think it also means that with their product portfolio diversified a little bit, ultimately they're just more appealing both to SMEs and large enterprises because they can offer an all-in-one package.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And companies like Adyen are really good at segmenting things as well in terms of what your needs are.
And then I feel like at the same time, there are companies in fintech who are kind of taking it a step farther. So we've seen it in Stripe where it's not just embedded finance, but now they're going into embedded insurance as well. So yeah, I think there will be a lot more adoption into different areas, not just necessarily finance or banking solutions, etc., but then more of a holistic
Approach?
Maybe not approach, but then diversification into different areas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Okay, so you go beyond payments.
Yep.
Basically, you need to also touch on other areas of the business. Yeah. From a kind of back to the hiring point of view, any very interesting recruitment strategies you saw companies applied that you were impressed by or that you remembered?
To be honest, no.
No.
I haven't seen anything over the last 12 months which is like wildly bucking the trend of what's come from the past. I think RPOs as such are on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
As well, we saw with you working with Blue Code earlier this year, I think it's becoming a bigger piece in the recruitment industry. But yeah, I don't think other than that and sort of a greater adoption of AI tooling, I don't think an awful lot has changed.
What about internal TA hiring? Any developments there? I mean, I think we've gone through a year or a year and a half of layoffs before we started this year. I think TA was hit quite significantly by that.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of typical trend, especially when it comes to tech. Hiring seems to be very cyclical, and when companies aren't expanding heavily or, by extension, don't have an awful lot of funding coming in, then there's a tendency to just cut TA loose.
Yeah,
we saw it in COVID. We saw it over the last year. Personally, I think it's quite short-sighted. I mean, it's always going to be good news for recruitment agencies because companies will struggle to hire the kind of talent that they're looking for when they do start hiring again. But it's not a long-term vision as such when it comes to overall growth, and can, in my opinion, lead to quite negative employee branding and that sort of thing.
Yeah, how do you then see, what do you think is a right approach with this? Because hiring will remain cyclical, always, most likely, right? So how do you avoid this trap of going through redundancies, letting go of your TA teams? Oh, we need to hire again. We don't have TA, so we need to go for agencies again. How can you create, you think, more stability on that side? What do you think is the right approach?
I think maintaining more of a steady level when it comes to talent acquisition teams. So rather than hiring loads of people when it's busy and then letting them go again, retaining those staff who really understand the needs of the business, who really understand how to find the right talent for these companies. And when they go and get stuff, sticking with them and looking into other areas that they can add value across the business. And let's be honest, there will still be hiring going on, even if it's not a massive hiring cycle.
True, yeah.
And then when that time comes back around, you're way better positioned than your competitors. And people will be more interested to work for you because of the fact that you've retained that talent instead of letting them go.
Yeah, totally, yeah. Kev, any thoughts on that?
I mean, seems like an obvious one, but you could always use contract recruiters, especially when that, big influx of positions opens up, to bring on 2 or 3 really tried and tested contract recruiters specifically. No, outside of that, no.
No, I think, or you see companies sometimes doing kind of little, I wouldn't say expeditions, but having an exchange program somewhat with other departments. So you have a TA person being trained to become a KYC officer, for example, for a couple months. The big banks do this really well. I know Rabobank does this quite a bit. Another one, Fintech springs to mind, is Fourthline, who does that. I think they did the other way around. They needed more TA people, and they were able to train 2 KYC officers, I think, into recruiters and switch them over. So if you have people who can wear multiple hats in the business, then when indeed there's less pressure on recruitment, you can have them do other tasks. I think that's why you often see HR not taking just care of HR, but also taking care of talent acquisition, right? Because they can focus more on one or the other, depending on the kind of timings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't necessarily know they were doing that.
No, yeah. Sorry.
Is it specifically like a certain department? Compliance wouldn't necessarily seem like it would be the...
Yeah, but I think if you need a sourcer, then maybe that's why it lends itself really good for that. I don't know. I mean, I guess a recruiter can be a sales guy as well, or girl, right? So maybe that is a... But I'm just making this up. I mean, it's just more the principle of having an exchange program, I think, is interesting. And I think it also increases retention because people are more interested to stay with you if they're also there to learn other skills that they have a keen interest in. Any other creative ways you've seen this year of companies trying to attract talent?
I mean, a pretty obvious one seems like Bunk with the Get Shit Done Day, where during the process, they have the candidate come and spend, I don't know how many hours, 4 hours to a full day with themselves or with Bunk itself. Introduce them to the software, the types of platforms that they'll be using, kind of test how that certain candidate would act in the working environment that is Bunk or any kind of fast-paced fintech.
Yeah.
So I think kind of challenging the normal 2-3 rounds of interviews and then a case study will ultimately benefit a business like Bunk, especially when it is a bit more demanding. When it is kind of that stereotypical fast-paced fintech environment. Yeah.
Yeah, I also know of this kind of founder experience programs. I think Revolut does this as well as Plate, where they have entrepreneurial types come in and take care of building a whole new business line or building a whole new product and really running that as if it is a small startup within the business. I think that's a great way as well to attract kind of, again, entrepreneurial talent, which oftentimes these fast-moving fintechs need and look for, especially now that they're expanding and they're trying to build new products and roll out several bets. And that's, of course, an appealing way to go into such a business. What kind of, is there a trend you've seen this year that had the most impact on hiring needs? I think the one that I was thinking about is that nearshoring, offshoring, where you see companies like Worldline, for example, as well as the larger banks, but also smaller organizations really who are deciding to outsource part of their workforce to lower cost countries when it comes to salaries, either to Eastern Europe or to Southern Europe. Is that something you've seen a lot happening this year?
Yeah, I think it's been an ongoing thing, but there's definitely a lot of businesses looking to utilize that option. I think probably it's been driven by sort of what happened in 2023 with a lack of funding coming through and a lot of companies having to pivot towards, more profitable business models has meant that they've looked for cheaper alternatives.
Definitely,
And I think the larger businesses especially are able to use that at scale and save themselves a ton of money.
Yeah, so true, yeah. Kev, have you seen it more?
Yeah, I've noticed, with a lot of the tech teams, they'll go to cheaper alternatives in terms of locations. Hiring trends in general, I would say compliance is always kind of a booming one for us. I think with BNPLs and kind of the enhanced consumer protection kind of aspect of it. Obviously, with that, they're hiring a bunch in compliance. I think while certain aspects of companies are being offshored to cheaper locations, I think that there are still companies who are hiring in certain areas in the Netherlands and Europe in general.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. And I think this offshoring or nearshoring is, again, a trend, right? It will happen now because costs need to be cut, and then when things go well, companies like, no, let's get it closer to home because the experience is better. They can be part of the culture more. So that also goes in ebbs and flows. I feel just dependent on the way that the business is run, and I think also it comes down to what leadership thinks is the kind of vision for that setup, because there's pros and cons to nearshoring and offshoring as much as there is to insourcing. And I think probably US will do the most insourcing next year, given that Trump is going to come in office.
Honestly, I think near sourcing and offshoring is something that's here to stay. Maybe to a greater or smaller capacity, we'll have to see. But I think it's here to stick around. I don't think you're ever going to eliminate the need to have people based locally.
No.
If I take it in compliance, for instance, when it comes to KYC checks and so on, there are a lot of difficulties around documents being in different languages, which people can't understand. You know, I've seen finance departments being offshored with pretty disastrous results at times. But yeah, I'm not sure it's going to come back into Europe or America or wherever the case may be, as much as you're implying.
No, exactly. Yeah. On the topic of redundancies, we've seen quite a few, right, reorgs or redundancies happening. We named a few at the beginning. I get the question a lot of, okay, so now there must be a lot of talent on the market. There's good talent supply, so we'll be able to find the candidates ourselves. Is that a question you get asked often? How do you tend to respond to that?
I think it's an assumption that people have. I mean, generally speaking, when you see redundancies, you just see a number. You know, you mentioned TrueLayer laying off 70 people, or Miro laid people off earlier this year, and this kind of thing. You don't tend to see so much of a breakdown of who's actually being laid off or not.
Yeah.
And I often find they're in quite specific domains. Talent acquisition, for instance, is one that we talked about. People or clients will assume that because there's been big layoffs, there's a lot of available talent, but that isn't necessarily the case. Probably the talent that they're trying to hire for, their competitors are also trying to hire for too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So no, I don't think it's as clear cut as saying it's a lot easier to hire now. I think the competitiveness for top talent is still as fierce as ever.
If anything, I think there's more noise as well, right? If you look at some of these LinkedIn jobs, even if we put out a job on LinkedIn, but also if you speak to clients, they get hundreds of applicants, and I've heard a client say I had 200 applicants more or less, and there were 2 who were relevant. So they basically went through 198 CVs that were not the right fit. I think also because, again, an AI tool can't really bring the peculiarities that sometimes come with a specific role, right? Especially specialist roles. And I do feel that that's where probably still the biggest shortage will remain. The true specialists, especially when it comes to our industry, fintech or payments. That's where they're still lacking, even though there might be redundancies going on. Those are the people that tend to be retained.
Yeah. And I feel like the companies that do use our services are looking for a very specific type of profile, even if it's not just an engineer, it's a specific tech stack, right? Yeah. In engineering, or if it's a sales individual, it's a specific side of payments, whether it's issuing or something that's maybe not as common. It's just an account exec. So even now, I feel like the type of candidates we're searching for are those candidates who are not, just hanging around everywhere. I think they're a little bit tougher to find. And then at the same time, I don't think there are as many of them in the market in general.
Yeah, true. But these redundancies are tough, right? I think there's war stories, I think, flying around. And even us getting a peek into how these conversations go. I think there was recently, again, a TikTok video gone viral, I think, of someone being fired via video. I think it's not an easy thing to do, I think, these layoffs.
No, it's not. I find it pretty cheap, though, to be using AI and so on to...
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, that's indeed next level. That's an interesting one. We recently saw of someone firing someone through AI. I don't know how real that video actually was, but I think in general... what do you think is the right way to lay off people? And think not one person, think hundreds of people at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think that you should be laying off hundreds of people simultaneously. I think people deserve a face-to-face conversation, especially when they put a huge amount of time and effort work into a company and trying to help it succeed, you need a little bit more than just a mass notification that you're not going to be with the business anymore.
Not true, but I think even then there's ways of doing it, right? Let's assume that you don't have time to do 100 or however many conversations individually with someone, but you do want to make sure that everyone is waving off in the right way. The ones who did it the best, and that wasn't necessarily this year, but if you look at the Zuckerbergs and the Collinson brothers, as well as the Google CEO, Sundar Pichai is his name. Yeah, so you see Collinson brothers, Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, compared to some of the other tech CEOs, and like, for example, Elon Musk from X, and it was very unpersonable. The Zuckerberg, Collinson brothers, and Pichai, you saw their letters, and they first made an apology for them having to let go of these people, showed empathy, as well as took responsibility and said, I take full ownership of kind of us coming to this point and having to make this decision. And yeah, I think that's probably, if there is a right way to do it, then that's probably part of the recipe of doing it in the right way.
Yeah. I feel like it's a difficult one in general. Yeah, at the very least, I think these people are owed a video call to explain kind of why the decision was actually made, or what financial impact of actually not making those layoffs were. But yeah, it's a tough one. I feel like when you're firing 1,000 people, I don't know if there is necessarily a right way to go about it. Yeah. I think it's going to be devastating for the company in general. But I do think at the very least, hopping on a video call, or having that individual come into the office to actually send them off is probably best for the company, and then also the individual as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Salary wise, what developments have you seen this year?
I mean, salaries have generally gone up. I think it's sort of axiomatic that they'll have a rise, but certainly not as much as we've seen in previous years. With all the drive towards profitability, the slowdown in hiring that we've seen, they've remained pretty steady if you compare them to where they were 12 months ago.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at sort of 2021, 2022, you saw huge rises in certain areas of the business.
Yeah, I think just salaries in general have remained stagnant for the most part in 2024.
I'd say so.
Yeah, I feel like, again, in 2021, we could see someone spend a year in a payments company and then move the next year for a 20% bump. And I don't even think there are those 20% bumps anymore. I feel like with, again, getting specific compliance positions, I feel like they've remained relatively flat. Yeah. People aren't just willing to hire. I think every hire is, a bit more scrutinized by HR or the hiring manager.
Do you see candidates have different expectations on maybe more secondary benefits than before? Is there more of an ask for remote working, for example? Is there more flexibility asked for, being a parent, taking care of kids, more on pension? Is there any other kind of secondary benefits asks you've seen boom this year?
I think hybrid and remote working for sure, and a bit more flexibility. But I think that's been a trend for a couple of years now. And to be honest, I see it as more of an expectation. Of course, it varies depending on what your role is within the business. Some people need to be more present than others. But I think the days of being 5 days in the office every week, every month are really gone. So for most candidates, it's expected. What I do see is a lot of people saying they're more willing to be flexible on salary expectations and benefit expectations if they can be given more flexibility from working from home. Like, I've had plenty of people say to me, if it's fully remote, then I'm willing to drop my expectations by 5 or 10K in terms of remuneration.
And what other reasons do you see candidates moving jobs, other than, okay, my company's going down or I've been made redundant? What other reasons do you see this year of what are they looking for when they switch jobs?
I think stability is a major one. With people being laid off, with uncertainty around finances and so on, a lot of people just want to be sure that when they come into work, they're going to have a job. Yeah. And that's not going to be under threat in a couple months' time.
Yeah. just going back to the point before about remote work in general, I feel like when we were going through COVID, the year, 2 years after COVID, I felt like it was kind of here to stay. Whereas now we do see more offices more companies going back into the office.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know if that will impact someone's decision making, but I do think it comes down to the company and whether they're going to be there in 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah, I feel that the companies who are doing it now the most are the big tech companies, and they probably, I think, can take that risk. Say for a much smaller company that has maybe less of an employer brand, and it's a bit more risky to say, everyone comes back 5 days a week and then lose half your staff kind of situation. But yeah, it's an interesting development for sure. I like this question. What was the most overused phrase in fintech job descriptions in 2024? I wrote down fast-paced environment. I think fintech tries to pride itself on fast-paced environment, and any company, big or small, will always say it has to be able to thrive in a fast-paced environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been a staple of job descriptions in fintech since
even
forever
outside
now.
of fintech, yeah. Any other overused words you've seen a lot?
Yeah, agile thinking. We're a young and ambitious company. Fintech
Driven,
likes to think that
energetic.
it's cool, to be honest.
Strap strategic in front of an account manager, and it always makes it feel a little more enticing.
True, yeah. That's a smart way to do it, yeah.
You can imagine there's loads, though. There's so many buzzwords.
Oh, there is, definitely, yeah. I think there's books that can be written on that for sure. The use of those words, yeah. All right, cool, guys. To close things off then, what was your highlight of 2024?
My highlight of 2024, probably just a bit of a rebound for recruitment for fintech in general. I think 2023 was a tough year. I feel like we've made a lot of progress in 2024, and I'm just excited to see what 2025 has for us.
Yeah.
I just think more security in the global economy within the fintech space. It's probably my highlight for 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that sentiment. Things seem to have stabilized with a lot of businesses. And I'm hearing a lot of positivity in the market compared to where we were 12 months ago.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think people are more optimistic about 2025 than they were about 2024. About 2024. Yeah. I think also freelance growth is another one, I would say, specifically for us as a business, but I think also as a whole, even though, again, I think there will be another one where organizations will always remain in a love-hate relationship. They'll try to get they try to trim down on freelancers, then they can't find the perm people, and they say, okay, let's get the freelancers in, or they do have temporary projects and do actually need freelance people. I think it can be a great way to indeed create kind of a flexible workforce in your organization that could help you scale up and down really fast.
Yeah, I think simultaneously, it can be a really great solution for a lot of businesses who don't want to bring on full-time employees right now.
Yeah.
It gives them great flexibility. And as you said, on more like a project basis, it's a really useful tool to have in your arsenal.
Yeah.
And then everybody says their goodbyes at the end of it and goes their separate ways.
True. Yeah. Cool, guys. Awesome. All right. Thank you for sharing your review of 2025. Let's see what 2025 has in 20. Thanks for sharing your review of 2024. Let's see what 2025 has in store for us. Watch this space.
Thanks for here.
Thanks, Rogier.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the last In Check with Fintech episode of 2024. From all of us at PCN, we wish you happy holidays and look forward to having you join us again for our first episode of 2025 on the 8th of January.